As of August 20th, 511 sea turtles were recovered alive, 531 were found dead as a result of the oil spill. There are 5 species of sea turtles out in the Gulf of Mexico, and 4 of them were found in that area. No leatherbacks, and that's partly because leatherbacks are out in the Gulf more in the summertime, feeding on jellyfish, and don't come near shore during that time. So they found loggerheads, they found greens, they found hawksbills, they found Kemp's Ridleys. And the loggerhead was the only one that was just threatened. The others were all endangered. And as a direct result of the oil spill, the loggerhead has now been promoted to the endangered species list. So they're all endangered now. And sea turtles already had problems. This is a mahi-mahi cut for bait, and they found 18 sea turtle hatchlings in its gut. So they're eating quite a bit as snacks. Here's a mylar balloon in the grasses there in Gulf State Park. Sea turtles are the species that swallows the most plastic. And here is what the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service decided to do with them. This is one species that they could control during the spill because it's hard for an egg to run away from you. So as the big females came up and laid their eggs on the beaches, they already, through a sea turtle nest program, were being monitored, but now they were being monitored extremely closely. They took a GPS location of each one, and on the 50th day, the biologists and volunteers went in, dug up the nest, marked each egg with a green marker so that they could know which way the egg was turned, set them into styrofoam coolers, and put some of the sand from that beach into the cooler with them. As many of you probably know, when a hatchling is heading down to the water, it stops and tastes the sand along the way. And they believe that that, along with the Earth's magnetic field, are the ways that an adult sea turtle finds her way back to that same beach to lay her eggs. So they did pack the styrofoam cooler with some of that beach sand. And these biologists and volunteers worked together throughout the whole season to recover each of the sea turtle nests. And then they put them in an air-conditioned van, drove that van to the Pensacola airport. The U.S. Air Force flew the sea turtle hatchlings to Cape Canaveral, where they were stored in airplane hangars that were air-conditioned. And when each nest of hatchlings came out, they released them on the beaches at Cape Canaveral National Seashore into the Atlantic Ocean. And again, we don't know whether those adult females will come back to Orange Beach and Gulf Shores to lay their eggs or if they'll go elsewhere. Typically, the sea turtle hatchling leaves Gulf Shores, Alabama, goes a few miles offshore, spends the first 1 to 3 years in that sargassum seaweed that I showed you, feeding on little baby shrimp and crabs. Then they drop down to the bottom, spend another 5 or 6 years feeding on shrimp and crabs down on the bottom feeders, until they get about this big. And then they leave the Gulf, go out into the Atlantic, follow the Gulf Stream up to the Sargassum Sea in the North Atlantic, across to Europe, through the Azores, into the Mediterranean. They feed around the Aegean Sea for a while, come back down the west coast of Africa, take a free ride, the same one that the hurricanes take, across the Atlantic, back to the Caribbean, up into the Gulf, and find their way to within 10 miles of the beach where they hatched and lay their own eggs from the age of about 18 to about 70. They live to be about 120. So everybody goes, well, great, you just saved them a lot of time. You just pumped them into the Gulf Stream. Well, they were 3 weeks old. So they didn't go through that whole process in the Gulf, the whole time of getting larger. They were about this big. We tossed them into the Gulf Stream, where lots of big fishes feed along the edges on little snacks just that size. So only 20 of them were tagged with satellite tags on their carapace, on a piece of neoprene that allows their carapace to continue to grow. And those tags will only stay on there 18 months. So we'll have a little bit of information on how those 20 did, but definitely not all 2,168 that were transferred from the Alabama beaches to Cape Canaveral. But it was the only way to save any one of them. There would have been 100% mortality if they had gone right out into the Gulf. This is a boat cleaning operation at Boggy Point in Orange Beach at a public boat ramp. They closed the public boat ramp, and this is where they bring in the boats to be washed before they can go back to their marina or back to their dock, so that, because they have oil all over them. They've been helping with the oil spill. Well, this happened to be where my friend and colleague Margaret would bring high school students to do restoration programs. They would grow grasses at their high schools and greenhouses or out behind the school, and then they would bring the plants and put them around boat ramps and public access areas to try to prevent erosion, especially after hurricanes. The National Guard was protecting this site, wouldn't even let a dog walker get near it, especially a school bus full of high school students. So we got permission from someone who lives next door and talked to the Coast Guard about letting the high school students come in from this way just to be able to plant shoreline grasses on the south side of that public access area. And this year they are going to be able to go onto that site. Manatees that should have been down in the Florida spring-fed rivers got pushed up into the bays and bayous of the North Gulf Coast by those 700 boats and all the craziness during the oil spill cleanup. They didn't leave. These are particularly young male manatees, and now they're cold stressed and dying. Found in the Pascagoula River. The day before that, one in the Escambia River. 2 weeks before that, one in Mobile Bay, and 2 weeks before that, right outside of the Pascagoula River in Franklin Creek. 263 manatees have died of cold stress so far this season and counting. So another casualty of the oil spill. We didn't think manatees would be affected, but they are. We're starting to see the nesting sites being restored and being laid ready for this spring when the manatees arrive, or when the birds arrive. More of the Gulf is being opened up to fishing and shrimping. If people ask me my personal opinion, I say that I would not eat seafood from the Gulf of Mexico for the next 2 years. I think it'll take about 10 years before the water quality starts to reach what it was before the spill occurred. But new life on the coast reminds us that the world is resilient, and the hard work of dedicated researchers, oil spill workers, residents, and volunteers from all over the country gives us hope. So I hope to end it on a good note. Over on the table, I have some handouts, some hard copies of handouts for those of you who either don't have printers at home or don't have access to a way to print them up. For the rest of you, if you would leave me your email address on that sign-in clipboard, I can email you the handouts as attachments. I have a list of websites about the oil spill, and my very favorite one is the last one. There's some on there for educators, there's some on there about the effects of oil, but the last one that you've got to go to is called BP Coffee Spill, and it's a comedy spoof about BP executives spilling a cup of coffee in their boardroom. It's a classic. I also have a timeline of the oil spill starting April 20th and going through August, so you can see how things evolved throughout that time. And I have a copy of a poem that I wrote in June when I was down there dealing with the spill. There are brochures called Back to the Beach that were produced by BP. You can kind of see their plans for the next 3 years on the Alabama coast. And then there are some things that are just single copies that you're welcome to take a look at, or I can make photocopies of them later if you are interested in having one. And 3 of them are incident reports from NOAA and NIMS. Each day during the oil spill, they released these incident reports that were available on their website to the public. They showed a map of the Gulf and where the spill was and where it was expected to go, so weather became very important all of a sudden. They also showed how many people, how many boats, how many airplanes, how many helicopters were involved in the cleanup, how many wildlife refuges along the Gulf were affected, how many birds, mammals, and reptiles had died to that point. So you can kind of follow those and see a progression as the time goes on with the spill. And then I have some of my cards, and you're welcome to grab one of those if you'd like.